the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. I'll be right back.
I wouldn't have objected to Zoe in church, but this is the first day of the Triduum, the great 3 days in which we enter into the story that defines us as a people, the story of Jesus' death and resurrection. Today is Maundy Thursday, the first of the 3 days, when we recall Jesus' Last Supper with his closest disciples. On Palm Sunday, we celebrated Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem. The crowds hailed him as king, which was both true and a deep misunderstanding, because he was not at all the kind of king they were seeking. Jesus spent the next several days teaching in the temple in an atmosphere of growing tension and hostility as he challenged the corruption of the temple leadership. Now Jesus has gathered his disciples for a final meal, the Passover according to 3 of the Gospels, or just before the Passover according to John. Jesus is fully aware that this is his last meal with them, that his hour has come to depart from this world. It is his last opportunity to teach them and show them the depth of his love for them. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. He loves them by sharing a meal with them and by kneeling before each of them and taking the role of a servant, washing their feet. It is such an intimate scene. Who would wash our feet other than a parent, a nurse, someone paid to give us a pedicure? Only a lover, and that is what Jesus is. What makes this scene so poignant and painful is that Jesus knows that one of the disciples will betray him. Another will deny he ever knew him, and almost all the others will run away and abandon him when he is dying. And yet, he loves them with all his heart. He's willing to do anything for them, anything to heal them and the fractured world in which they live. John's Gospel mentions a character known as the beloved disciple. In the reading for tonight, he's the unnamed person who's reclining close to Jesus. In those days, people had their meals reclining at low tables. When Jesus tells them one of them will betray him, Peter motions to the beloved disciple to ask Jesus, which one? There's been a lot of speculation about who this beloved disciple is meant to be over the centuries. Was it John who wrote this gospel? Some say it was Lazarus or Mary Magdalene. We don't know, but some say that the reason this disciple is not named is because he represents all of us. Because the intimacy and the closeness that he had with Jesus is meant for each one of us. We are invited to enter this scene as the beloved disciple, reclining next to Jesus, part of Jesus' close circle of disciples. Our hearts are close to the surface on this night and through all these 3 days. But on this night, hearing the responses of the disciples, we shift uneasily as we consider our own flawed humanity and wonder what our response would be. We tremble as we consider the violence and injustice in the world today, which points to our human capacity for evil, just as it did in Jesus' day. But we know, in spite of that painful self-knowledge, that we are God's beloved. God became human for us. God lived and healed and forgave and taught for us. And on this night, long ago, God handed over his life for us, choosing to accept his fate rather than raise a hand against any of us. As John's Gospel puts it, no one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. We are at that meal that began so long ago and will never end. The Eucharist is the feast of love where wounds are healed, wrongs are forgiven, and broken relationships are reconciled. Like millions of Christians across the centuries and around the world tonight, we gather at the Lord's table to be loved by him, to be fed with his body and blood, to be reconciled with God and one another. It is here that we come to know ourselves as the beloved and open our hearts to others. People have celebrated this meal, this feast of God's love, and our unity with God and one another in so many circumstances, in churches and basilicas, caves and catacombs, on the run, in prison, in refugee camps, in hospitals, in bomb shelters, at weddings and baptisms and joyous celebrations, with bread, with rice and fish, with plantains, with wine, with grape juice, with water. Whatever the circumstances, this meal transforms us. How can we receive Christ's love without opening our hearts to others? How can we eat the bread of life without sharing in the suffering of others and giving bread to the hungry? We are called to leave this table where all are welcomed and build a more welcoming world. The gift of God's life, given for us and hidden in a piece of bread, gives us strength and courage to build a new community of love, marked by reconciliation and right relationships, wholeness and justice. May this night and the next 2 days be a time of deep communion with Jesus, a time of opening your heart to his boundless love, and a time of renewal of our faith and strength so we can take part in the healing and transforming of the world. Amen.
Amen.